The Jesus Trilogy, Book 2, Then There Were Two, Chapter 9, Part B. Jesus and the others wondered why Pilate, the ruler of all Israel, had come all the way up here for the funeral of an obscure Hebrew. Even King Herod was puzzled, and so was Barabbas. What was the deal? Only Pilate himself knew. The secret police, SL, meaning Secret Legion, had been keeping a close eye on Abel and the Six Points bunch ever since the diamond heist the year before. They were all aware of Abel's subversive activities. The SL had decided in a meeting with Pilate that it would be good to show the Roman presence at this funeral. They would put everyone in attendance on the Six Points sympathizer list. There were always rumors of trouble, and the Romans were determined to suppress any trouble. Pilate had been sent to Judea to keep order, and he was not going to allow any disturbance of that order. He knew Caesar was always watching and had spies in the SL that reported directly to him. What he did not know was that Six Points also had an informer in the SL. Once Pilate got positioned, the harpist resumed her ode, and the priest stepped to the altar. The music softened, but continued. Honorable Governor Pilate, Honorable King Herod, and dear friends, we are come here to lay to rest our honorable friend Abel. His life, as you know, came to an abrupt end in the fiery accident this past week. He died trying to swim to safety, disdaining lifeboats so others could live. You may not be able to hear us, Abel, but you died an honorable death, and God is proud to welcome you into his kingdom. Pilate rolled his eyes. Young Pontius elbowed his dad and gave him a look of scorn. Barabbas, who had been crying steadily, suddenly stopped, and a look of amazement came over him. Where did this priest get his information? He and his mother had talked little of the circumstances of Abel's death. He had told her that Dad had drowned. The coroner's report also said death by drowning. Barabbas thought a moment and said under his breath, "Just as well." His mother squeezed his hand, and tears again came to Barabbas' eyes. Dorian, his love, squeezed his other hand. She too was crying. The casket, which until now had been closed, was opened by the priest, and the eulogy was given by another priest. It had been partially written by Barabbas' mother. The audience remained attentive. Johnny and Jesus sat next to their respective girls as the eulogy droned on. Diana leaned over to Johnny and whispered, "Did you get a little thrill?" She squeezed his thigh as she said it. "What?" He turned to her and asked. "Did you get a little thrill carrying Mary?" Johnny couldn't believe his ears. He leaned over and whispered back, "How could you think such a thing, honey?" "Don't honey me," she whispered back a little too loudly. "We'll talk later." "You bet we will, and that will be all we'll be doing." Her face was turning red, and a look of disgust came to his. Mary looked over and put her finger to her mouth to hush up the unhappy couple. The custom was that after the eulogy all would file by the open coffin and then take a sip of the wine of sacrifice. Then the priest would deliver a short sermon and close the casket. Following this, there would be an interment. The eulogy was now complete, and the procession was about to begin. The priest now beckoned Barabbas and his mother, but was startled to see Pilate's sedan move forward and pass in front of the open casket. It stopped momentarily and then returned to its original position. Even the crowd was stunned. Normally, royalty would not join this viewing procession. King Herod, not to be outdone, signaled his bearers, and his sedan lurched ahead. Herod, who was standing, lost his balance and ended up sitting on the sedan bench, his crown tilted to one side. Some of the crowd chuckled, but the priest somehow maintained a straight face, though it was a struggle. Herod adjusted his crown, and not wanting to be embarrassed further, remained seated. But the audience gasped when his sedan halted at the casket, and the old king beckoned for the cup. He held it up, took a drink, and then raised it in Pilate's direction. He knew full well that Pilate had to refuse the drink. Any Roman found partaking of Hebrew wine was given the death penalty. It was considered an act of treason. Drinking Hebrew wine was considered like drinking Hebrew blood. No self-respecting Roman could or would do such a thing. Pilate gracefully held up his hand in salute to Caesar, and Herod lowered the cup. He'd won this duel and didn't wish to press his luck further. The theatrics now over, there still were murmurs from the crowd. First Barabbas' mother, then Barabbas and Dorian, then the rest of the more than 600 guests made it the trek up to the casket and partook of the wine. Mary and then Jesus passed by. One by one each took a sip from the common cup. After this came Diana and Johnny. Johnny looked ahead as long as he could, keeping his focus on Diana's swaying derriere. He knew they would soon have some hard times, but he also knew he could not live without her. He hated funerals, but he had to accept them as part of life. He had done all right at his father's funeral. His father was probably looking down on him right now. As Johnny got by the casket, he took just a quick glance at the body. His face turned white as a sheet. An overwhelming wave of nausea twisted his stomach, and he began to sway backwards. Judas, who was behind him, grabbed onto his big friend and steadied him. Diana turned to see how pale he was. She became frightened. Soon everyone was watching. Judas and Jesus helped Johnny back to his chair. Diana took a wet cloth and mopped his brow. He was breathing and his pulse was steady. She shook him a little, and he opened his eyes briefly. Dr. Luke had come by this time, and Johnny was carried out to the back of the crowd where he was given some smelling salts. He remained pale and began to vomit profusely. The music resumed, and the procession continued. Must have been something he ate, Dr. Luke surmised. But he hasn't eaten all day, Diana said, definite worry in her voice. Could be some infection, I suppose, but there's no fever. He hates funerals, but I've never seen any funeral affect him like this one, his mother Elizabeth offered. The smelling salts brought him around. I'm so sorry, he said weakly. For some inexplicable reason, he had never ever met Abel's father until that fateful encounter on the ferry. He was semi-conscious, but his mind was racing. How could it be? Barabbas' father was sabotaging the ferry that he and his bride were on. He was only defending the passengers and crew, yet he had killed his best friend's father. The music played on as the procession flowed by the casket. It finally finished, and the priest now began to speak. The sermon had seemed to drag on, just as he knew it would. Barely audible, mourning continued. The soft harp music continued to play in the background. Another presence at this funeral fumbled in his coat and found what he was looking for. His target was not 30 paces away. He eased the 18-inch tube out of his pocket. He scanned the people seated in front of him. The crowd was all in mourning, real or faked, with all eyes focused on the priest. His target was no exception. But as he stood there amongst the mourners in a black cloak and looked towards the target, his hands began to tremble slightly. He had not counted on 2 targets. No matter, he would just have to get the job done. He always had in the past. He took the little dart from his pocket and eased it into the barrel of the bamboo tube. He hid it under his coat, taking care not to touch the pointed tip. He pulled off the wax protector as he scanned the crowd. No one was looking his way. He slowly eased the barrel to his mouth, took the biggest breath of his life, and blew for all he was worth. At that instant, Pilate turned to scratch his ear. The poison dart sailed on by the governor and embedded itself in Pontius II's right shoulder. Pontius let out a blood-curdling scream, immediately grabbed the dart and ripped it from his shoulder. He threw it to the ground and collapsed in a heap on the sedan floor. The marksman put the tube in a hole in the ground he was standing on. He had dug it in the precise size to accept the tube. He then used his foot to cover the hole with some loose dirt and resumed the soft chant of the other mourners. All eyes were now on Pilate's son, all except those of Barabbas. The point of the dart had caught his eye, and he now stared at the marksman. The marksman kept his head down and would not look up. By this time, Dr. Luke had accompanied the very ill Johnny on an ambulance cart to the hospital. Pilate's guard had put down the sedan and laid Pontius on the ground. He was not moving. Pilate yelled out in his booming voice, "Is there a doctor in the house?" There was no response. Jesus and Mary had come over and knelt down next to the stricken lad. Mary took his pulse. "Nothing," she said. "Are you a doctor?" Pilate asked. "No, but maybe we can be of help," Jesus said. "Is there a doctor?" Pilate's voice again boomed over the crowd, again with no response. There was just hushed whispers. The memories of the day in Jerusalem when Jesus performed mouth-to-mouth breathing on Mary's friend's husband flashed vividly through his mind. He could remember the awful smell and the taste of vomit, and his own stomach now became queasy. "Do something," Mary urged. Jesus realized he must act quickly. He raised his fist and struck Pontius on his now exposed chest. Pilate turned and said, "What the—" Before he could say anything more, Jesus quickly positioned his mouth on Pontius. He began blowing strong puffs of air into Pontius. Thankfully, there was no smell of vomit, but there was the smell of almonds on the young man's breath. Bitter, he thought. He kept blowing. 5, 10, 15, 20 puffs. He was beginning to get tired and lightheaded. He kept on. Suddenly, he felt Pontius' tongue in his mouth. The nausea returned. He quit puffing and between gasps said, "Check his pulse." Pontius was still not moving. "I can feel it. It's slow, but it's there." "He'll live, Jesus. He'll live." "You brought him back from the dead," Pilate said, stunned. He couldn't speak further, but put his hand on Jesus' shoulder and mouthed the words, "Thank you." Jesus, still gasping, nodded. The crowd also was stunned and remained silent, save the mourners, who continued to drone on, oblivious to everything but their job. Pontius' breathing, though shallow, was steady. He would survive this assassination attempt on his father. The priest waited a bit, then, despite the crowd around Pilate, said in a loud voice, "May my dear Abel, may he rest in peace of our Creator." And with that he closed the casket and it was dropped into the ground. Quickly the pallbearers, save Jesus and Johnny, covered it over with dirt. The priest nodded to the harpist and she began to play the recessional. The priest glanced at the mourners and they elevated the volume of their chanting, "All that is but one." The crowd was milling around Pontius. Pilate had regained his composure and came up to Jesus. He took his hand and said in a deep voice, "Thank you for saving my son's life. I shall never forget your kindness." "It is my duty and honor, Your Highness," Jesus said, but he did not do the perfunctory bow. He had predetermined that he would only bow to the Almighty God if and when he met him. Pilate got into his sedan, cradled his son's head in his arms, and said, "Maybe we'll meet again someday, and I can return your favor."